want to, we're going to start now. I'm Bruce Ripp, and I want to thank you all for joining us tonight on behalf of the city and the Department of Planning and Development. Welcome. I appreciate the crowd and the concerns about this project and the development happening around it. I want to introduce my colleague, Jeff Wetland. And the way it works is I do current planning, so I look at projects, specific projects, and like the one we'll talk about tonight. And then Jeff looks at kind of long-range policies. So so he'll talk for a few minutes tonight about what's going on in the long-range policy group at the city in terms of changes in the code, comprehensive plan. So there's kind of broad, long-range issues that affect us all. I want to talk about the purpose of the meeting, talk a little bit about some of the housekeeping things up in the front. We have a sign-in sheet. We have two sign-in sheets tonight. The one that says party of record, if you sign that, put your address on there, you will see further notices and mailings regarding tonight's project, or the project that brought us here tonight. Next to it is a speaker sign-in sheet, and I will use that to call on people tonight, so we'll just go down that list. If we get through the list and more people want to talk, or you want to talk again, and we have time, I'll just call on you from your seats. There's also a host of materials next to that table. There is the agenda, and it has, we'll talk about the order we'll do it in, which is, finish this introduction, Jeff will speak, and then it's really public comment. And we're here to listen to you. If you have some questions, we can try to answer them, but it's really to hear your thoughts on the project, on what's happening in the neighborhood. And if there are questions, we'll try to answer them. If not, there are a whole host of experts at the city that I can contact to help answer those questions. There is also, if you don't want to speak or you think of ideas after tonight, there's a public written comment form up front, looks like this, and it has my mailing address, and just send it to me. Also has my email, so you could address me there, and my phone number. So, actually I don't see my phone number on there, but I will give that out. And, but I welcome these comments, and we appreciate them. And they will be added to the public record. There's a bunch of material up there, as I said. There's also a handout. It looks like this. This has websites, city websites. You can go to the, talk about SEPA, the State Environmental Protection Act, our zoning regulations, some of the material that Jeff will talk about tonight in terms of long-range planning, what policies we're looking at, changes in the multi-family zoning code, perhaps. And then there's another handout that looks like this, which is more specific about low-rise multi-family zoning. So as I said, we're here to hear your comments. This project, unlike the ones I'm usually in this room, which have design review, doesn't have a design review component to it because it doesn't meet the threshold of design review. Jeff will probably touch on that as well. But it does trigger what's called the SEPA, State Environmental Protection Act. The status of this job is that my department made its initial reviews of the project. Both the zoning reviewer and myself sent correction letters that look like this, and they have a host of issues, many of them that you brought up in your letters and calls to me. And and those are on these corrections. The applicant or the developer of the property hasn't returned the drawings and responded to those corrections yet. Maybe they're waiting for this meeting, but I'm not sure. But I think I sent those out perhaps a month ago. I'm going to have Jeff speak, and then we'll just have the comment period, and I'll touch on the rules about that and how we'll work that. And so, go ahead.
Real quick question: is it possible to get a copy of the sign-in sheet?
Sure. Why don't you email me and I'll be able to send it.
Or we can just email you and ask.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
All right, well, thank you. I'm going to try to be brief because I know you all want to comment on the project tonight. But we did want to touch on a few big picture land use policy issues and why those are important. There's a lot of development happening here, as you know. There's a lot of land use signs up. There's a lot of cranes in the Junction. And it may seem to you at times like development's happening very fast, that maybe it's happening haphazardly, but we do want to assure you from the planning department and the city that there is a plan for where development can occur, and that plan is the city's comprehensive plan. And that's important because that's the overarching document that sets the land use policies for where growth can occur over time. The comprehensive plan was really created around 1994 when it was established and had a 20-year planning horizon that's gotten us to roughly where we are today. And it planned for growth of about 48,000 households across the city, and that's about how many households did grow within the city during that time. So one of the important things about that is that it designated the Junction as a hub urban village. You may be familiar with that, but what that means is that we have a series of urban villages and urban centers around the city, and those are the places where the most growth is focused, and that allows for single-family neighborhoods to stay single-family neighborhoods, and it allows us to concentrate where the most amenities will be focused, like parks, transit service, open space, libraries, and so forth. So the Junction is a hub urban village. A few of the other hub urban villages around the city are Fremont, Ballard, Lake City, North Rainier area. So those areas are expected to accommodate an amount of growth, and that's happening. Let's see here. I want to touch on a couple of other things. So the last comprehensive plan got us to where we are today, which is 2014. We're in the process of a major update to the comprehensive plan, which is called Seattle 2035. So it's very important, and I really welcome you to participate in that and comment on it, because it's that comprehensive plan that sets the policies for what zoning can go where. So if you have concerns about how and where growth is occurring, the size or scale of development, it's really effective to direct those comments to the Seattle 2035 process. There are bookmarks up here that have the web address and social media, etc. for that. The next large meeting on that process is going to be at the end of June, and at that time, the main kind of themes and ideas for what's most important for the next 20 years of growth and change in Seattle will be established and discussed at that time. So I really encourage you to check that out. I just wanted to touch on a couple of other things. As Bruce mentioned, he does the current planning and reviews the projects, but the zoning is really sets the basic rules for how large development can be, how much parking it should have, etc. So those are the types of decisions that stem from the comprehensive plan policies. And by the time it gets to the review, whether it's design review or SEPA review, there's limited amount of discretion for how much you can change a project from what's allowed by the zoning rules. So talking about zoning for a minute, the project that we'll hear about tonight is in a low-rise multifamily zone, And low-rise multifamily zones are generally in areas between the commercial core, transitioning to more single-family areas, and that's similar to the area that this project is in. There were some changes to low-rise multifamily zones around 2010. Some of those changes were to change some of the setback requirements, some of the height limits to allow a little more flexibility. If you remember, before that time, we were getting a lot of the six-pack townhouses. And around 2010, there was the sense that those were not the best design outcomes, and that they weren't really allowing for the type of development that should be occurring in multifamily zones. So there were some changes in 2010. This project came in under the code after those changes in 2010. And we're seeing the first generation of development in these new low-rise multifamily zones. And some folks felt like, in some cases, the buildings were a little bit too big or out of scale. And last fall, in October, Sally Clark asked the department to take a look and review development that's happening in low-rise zones like this one and evaluate making some changes, make sure that we're getting the outcomes that we expected when the zoning was changed in 2010. So we're in the process now of making some changes to low-rise zones like this one that would do a few things. I won't go into the minutia of it, but could slightly reduce the height of a building like this or the buildable floor area. And we can talk a little bit more about that if you want. But I just wanted to mention that that's a change to the zoning, a policy review that we're undertaking right now. And let's see here. Did I miss anything? I think that covers most of what I wanted to touch on. I'd be happy to answer more specific questions, but I just wanted to make sure that we reiterated that the growth that's occurring in the Junction is consistent with the city's overarching comp plan. And if you feel like it's not the right direction, I really encourage you to participate in the update of the comprehensive plan.
Can you just clarify some of the low-rise changes that occurred in 2010 allowed for more density or scaling back the rest?
So in 2010, it allowed for slightly more density. It didn't change the location of the low-rise zones. It basically made the standards a little bit more flexible.
Is there anything in the zoning that takes into consideration the proximity of the BIA entity and the restrictions and constraints that puts on the property owners and the business owners in that area as it affects the surrounding area?
The question was about whether there would be anything in the zoning if there's a BIA, would that affect what could be allowed under zoning?
What is that?
And you mean a business improvement area?
There is a business improvement area in the Junction, and one thing in particular it requires that the business owners within this survey, their employees are required to park off-site. And that does not include the trustee property parking areas. They cannot park there. So that puts more parking pressure and density out into the surrounding neighborhoods. And as a business owner, 4 doors from here, I know my employees for the last several years have been parking 2 blocks away. And that was before a lot of construction started here. And now we're seeing more density come in. And you're not providing any parking, for these projects.
Okay, so
And the BIA is already putting additional pressure on that. So we don't have that flexibility, to accommodate that. Thank you.
So we will have, I have a list of 16 speakers. So let's think about 2 to 3 minutes apiece. We have about a little over an hour here. And so I would state your name. Well, I'll state your name actually. And just keep it to about 2 to 3 minutes. it's not helpful to repeat things that previous speakers said, because I already know that information. But we're here to listen, and I will write down your thoughts as you're speaking them, and again, thank you. Pat Pardo?
What do you want? Do you want us to stand up or just sit here or what?
Stand up. Good.
Okay. I live right across the street from where this project is considered being built. I'm in the, on the little designated map where it says Ave Southwest, I'm there. And we have been just absolutely encumbered by parking for the last couple of years, especially when they built Oregon 42 up here. We saw the guys in their lunch pails driving from in front of our houses. I have the one fire hydrant right in front of one of my driveways that doesn't exist because the fire hydrant is there. And the people who come in there and park in front of the fire hydrant, they park up to our driveways, and this is before this 40-unit building. Now, the assumption that all 40 units of this are going to come without cars is pretty blank. That's not thinking very far ahead. It would be one thing if we were next to the University of Washington, that might be a possibility, but not here in this residential area. So the parking is just going to get worse, and as the first man who commented, his employees have to park someplace. They are parking down there already. And for the city to allow a 40-unit building to come in there with that much more is just not acceptable by the neighborhood. We have four churches, and the high school, the Seattle Lutheran High School, and we have Holy Rosary School, and West Seattle Christian, I think, still has something going for it in the child care area, but I don't know exactly what. But there we are. Parking is a big problem.
Thank you. Jim Short?
I'm Jim Schwartz, and I live next door to Pat, so I'm familiar with her concerns. I have a list of issues. I've been working with a smaller group, a subset of the concerned public. We had a public meeting back in March, and then out of that came a working group of concerned individuals, impacted folks, including Hope Lutheran and the Seattle High. So we've worked together. We've put together a list of points that we think are important. I've classified them as stuff that has the corrective comments that or corrective notice that you put out. We realize that doesn't mean they're going to get solved. We just know that you're asking them to be solved. Now, what you accept as being solved is also a concern, and we don't know what to expect yet. So that's outstanding. It's the opinion of the working group that I'm with is that the 40 units is just too high a density for the site. And we're really looking ultimately for this to be built out with townhomes, which is consistent with what it had been built out with before the zoning change. And curiously, the two lots down is exactly what's being built there also now, currently. So I think that's an important consideration. The corrective notices, there's 20 of them, and then we have 13 comments that do not have corrective notices with them. The things that are directly the direct code issues that we're concerned about, they really start off with inadequate alley, and we don't believe it's a developable site for this density. I think it's just patently outright unacceptable. I had the opportunity of measuring from the junction here, which I believe is our frequent transit service, to the site, and it's 1,600 feet. So that's beyond the quarter mile, which I think is inconsistent with being able to have no parking. The parking, as you've commented in your comments here, needs to be enclosed. I think that's going to result in a redesign, as is the alley issue and the transit issue. There's a north side setback. According to the plans, it's a 5-foot setback. It's a 71-foot long wall. I believe it has to be a 7-foot setback. Was not picked up, I don't believe, on the comments. But that will result in a redesign being necessary, I believe. The size of the roof deck is ridiculous. It's the entire size of the building. That shows no sensitivity to the people living on any side. So I think that's going to require a redesign, and that was commented in your, I think it has to be reduced to 150 feet, which would be a radical difference. In doing that, they'll lose their green factor, and doing that, they also will not be able to meet their amenities component, I don't believe. The geotech, boy, I read that thing and I was really scared. They're proposing taking out, I think, 19,000 cubic feet of soil. Excavation, you're bringing 4,000 cubic feet back in. That's going to be hundreds of dump trucks, literally. A 10-yard dump truck, start working through. But that's one scary part, is the traffic on the alley, because it's going to be the alley access, no turnaround, so the truck's going to have to back down. It's going to be going by Lutherans, Hope Lutheran. But the soils themselves, and this was in one of your corrective comments, I believe, is that you can only excavate from April to October because of the water sensitivity. The likelihood that the soil will actually run away too quickly and the sides collapse and the houses up next to it being impacted. And this is because of the extreme amount of excavation going on. Last week was outside of this time period, and it's been raining tremendously. I'd be very concerned. I think that's a risk that can't be controlled effectively. And if I had a neighboring site, I'd be extremely concerned. Another element that affects the design is the frontage is not on the street. It's not visible from the street. I think there's a concept of crime prevention through environmental design. I'd really like that to be considered. There's comments that will be furthered by addressing parking, the transitional zoning element, compatible uses, ADA compliance. It's interesting that you have 2 ADA units, but 1 ADA parking spot. The only access to the site for an ADA person is through a van. They would need to be driven, dropped off. So I would think that you'd want to have two units there. There's also no access to the trash, which I would think would be a concern. Well, my perspective here, I had a couple other comments.
I yield a minute of my time.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, thank you.
You're doing good, man.
The DPD does have the power and the obligation, to protect us. And I don't think this is going to be consistent with what the neighborhood needs. And we'll have other people talk about the transitional element, but this doesn't do it. Single family on one side, and it's just it's a half a block wide. I mean, it's LR2 zoning for just that half block. It's just not acceptable. And if I read this zoning code correctly, because there's not a design review, you guys are responsible for making these judgments. I mean, there's nobody else to do it. So if you don't do it, this thing gets built, it's going to be a lasting scar, I think, in the neighborhood. So that's all my comments. I think other people follow through on
Mine gonna be quick because thank you, James. He basically covered everything that was covered, we need to cover. But I just want to bring to your attention when my first letter, and when I talked with you, and then also indicated that I think my comment letter was the first one, basically saying that this project needs a turnaround, and because they have not provided that, it should be denied. And I was very surprised to see that they continued with submitting, submitting plans, and it went to, I think they also provided, thank you, with construction plans. So I still don't understand city's process, that if by code something is required, why the city puts the developer in a position to spend money and, design and, go further with it. Another thing that, and my comment is on file, so you know what my comments were, but something that really bothers me now, and this is a new comment, and I think, Jim, you mentioned it about crime prevention through environmental design. In my job, I recall that in some particular cases, the police department gets involved when to look at the building design. And I think in this particular case, Seattle PD needs to look at this because for a few reasons. These window wells here are perfect, place for somebody to hide. There is also, there is no lighting on 41st Avenue Southwest. Go ahead. Oh, you guys were talking, or? Okay. And Jeff, you mentioned this is the urban village, but in an urban village, we don't have on 41st, we don't have any street lights, so I don't know what kind of an urban village we are. But I think there is a need for a street light, regardless of if this development goes in or not. And let's see what else. Yeah, I think I just kind of stop right there. Thanks.
Thank you.
Could I add a quick point on the window wells? I don't think they're, I know the fire department passed on it today, but I don't think they're an effective way of people exiting. It's 40 inches up to be able to get out of the windows according to the design. I tried mocking that up, and then you have 3.5 feet into the window well. That's not enough room for somebody to actually be on their hands and knees. And then you get on the ladder and crawl up. Then the window wells, according to the plans, just stop off at grade. There's no railings to protect people from falling out or into them. They're an excellent place for people to hide. It just seems to me like it's a disaster waiting to happen. And then from a, once again, I don't know why the fire department didn't pick up on this, but I had the impression that routes, emergency routes, is supposed to lead to a sidewalk. And this just goes to landscaping in what's already a small area. And do the window wells count in the setbacks? I don't think they do they? Yeah. But I mean, it would only leave 1.5 feet according to this plan to be able to get by.
When the applicant submits a building plan, the city will look at, my department will look at life safety issues, and part of that is exiting. So hopefully they'll catch that.
Okay, great.
Hopefully they'll catch that.
Kathy Schwartz.
I'm Kathy Schwartz, I live at 2434 41st Avenue. I wanted to point out, actually Jim mentioned it very briefly, but the Alaska Junction bus stop is really the main frequent bus stop that we have, and that's the one that's a little over 1,600 feet away from the lot line of this property. The bus stop that happens to be within a quarter mile of this property, it's not a main line. It meets the newly interpreted rule from November 2012 that allows averaging of how frequently the bus stops there. But it's only one bus route that comes even close to that definition of frequent transit. And it's only a bus route that runs north-south through West Seattle. And then once it gets way south, it heads to South Center. That is not the bus that people are going to be taking for regional transit. For regional transit, people are really going to the farther away bus stop.
work at Hope Lutheran Church. I'm the administrator there, and I just wanted to point out that I think this project is a little bit unique in that it's sited at the top of a crest of a hill. 41st Avenue is a crest in the middle of the street, and so there's limited sight distance when you're driving in either direction. And we believe that with the increase in density, there will be an increased number of vehicles that will be kind of hovering in the middle of the block from time to time between moving vans, delivery vans, what have you. Because of the lack of parking there, those types of vehicles will increasingly be present on that block, creating a really hazardous situation that's already present in that area. And so that's one item that we wanted to raise. Another one that Jim already brought up is just the fact that putting this scale of a building in that LR2 zone, that's supposed to be a bridge between the NC 240 zone and the single family zone, when the rest of that block is already developed in townhomes or being planned to be developed into townhomes, seems incongruous with what the overall plan for the urban village was supposed to be. And we believe that the transition of that block should be considered in the design.
That's just a density chart comparing Oregon 42 proposed development, the existing townhouse developments, and our homes.
Paul Rafford?
Having observed and experienced the terrible parking problem, which we all experienced tonight probably, around the West Seattle Junction and similar areas, I would like to request that the city require a minimum of one parking space per unit off-street for this project as well as for other projects of this nature. The idea that tenants will ride public transportation to work is great, but not reality. They might, but a large percentage will still have cars to go shopping, take short trips, or transport things. Unless there was a guarantee that people in these buildings would not own a vehicle, it makes no sense to construct buildings without parking, putting more vehicles on our already crowded streets. The urban village concept merely means that lots of commuters will bring their cars to the area like West Seattle Junction to park them so they can catch their bus. Public support of bus service with more rather than less routes needs to increase before a reduction in required parking spaces could work.
This is a representative from the Holy Rosary Parish.
I could speak for them.
There's no name, it just says Holy Rosary Parish.
If that's me. My name is Shawnee Zanheiser. I'm a parishioner.
I'm sorry.
Can't hear you. My name is Shawnee Zanheiser. I'm a parishioner at Holy Rosary Church. Our parish is concerned about parking. That would be our first concern. We have a lot of elderly. We try to encourage the younger parishioners to park further away so our older parishioners can attend church, because parking is already a problem. We also, along with Hope Lutheran, have a school, and we are concerned about drop-off and pick-up of children. The traffic there is going to increase, which is an added concern of safety, actually, for the children, because they do cross the road between the church and the school quite frequently. Again, I agree with the other objections that were brought up. There is no turnaround for this project. There are several inconsistencies with this. I understand that the zoning is a separate issue, but I think that if there's no design review and we're having people make these decisions for us on this type of building, then I really think it does become our opportunity to say, we think you made a bad choice for this neighborhood. Thank you very much.
John Lisco.
I'm John Lisco. I represent Seattle Lutheran High School. School's been there for about 35 years, high school. We're adjacent to Holy Rosary. Our partnership with Hope Lutheran has been tremendous over the years. I share all the same concerns that have already been addressed tonight. In addition to, Jeff, you mentioned that 2010, the new comprehensive plan is actually planned to increase density. Yet 48,000 households have already grown, have been developed, and we've met the goal. Well, what more can we? Why do we want to continue in this mode of density increase? I don't understand what the full comprehensive plan of particularly West Seattle is, unless we're trying to look like Belltown. That's the first thing. Second of all, this is not a family unit. We're in a transitional zone, so to speak. I don't see how this is a family, low-rise family, multi-family zone. Third of all, if I lived on this street, is this what you'd want to look at? This is not multifamily. This is, by all means, I had more room in my dorm room in college, which was a long time ago. And I don't mean to make fun of this, but that's just a little bit out of the plan. So with that said, I hope that this new review of the zoning laws considers all of this. This may very well fit better on California, and I apologize to any of you who live on the alley adjacent to California because you'd be looking at the back end of this, but it really does not fit this neighborhood, nor does it fit any those of us who live in West Seattle. We want families. You know, we're able to compromise with a 4-unit condo, but what we want is affordable housing. And right now, housing isn't affordable over here. So by building more, this just destroys that whole concept. So I hope you all consider this in the new review of the zoning laws. Thank you.
Lawrence, please.
As you've all heard, in 2010, they changed the zoning. So what they've really done is they've got 80 times the density there. You have to hear that, 80 times, because that house had one lady in it for about 40 years, and now they're probably going to have 80 people there. So that's 80 times the density, and we're going to see 40 more cars on the road, on the streets, because that's what those people are going to have. So that's the kind of density they're proposing in their zoning. Now, zoning used to be concerned about the people and about the community, but currently in Seattle, zoning is all political. It's completely driven by the political machine. It's not concerning what the neighborhood and what's good for us. It's what they want for our community. So you have to be aware of that. So you have to get involved in this new comprehensive plan. Otherwise, the political machine is going to change West Seattle completely from what we know today. So just so they know up here, I was going to ask, who's in favor of a 40-unit development over at that place? Just show your hands, everybody, so they can see, because only 19 people are going to talk. Who's in favor of that type of development? Whoa, nobody is. Who's in favor of 40 more cars on the street and only providing 4 spaces for cars and 1 for handicap? Who's in favor of that? No. Thank you. Who's opposed?
And, Peggy?
Yeah, I'll pass.
Kristen.
Hi, I'm Kristen Okabayashi. I'm the principal of Hope Lutheran School, which this proposed building is right on our property, basically. We have that narrow alley and it's right next to it. So I'm speaking on behalf of the school, but I'm also a resident of West Seattle, and I've lived here since 2000 with my husband in Fort Woods. So I just want to start off by saying we're not unaware that we live in an urban area, and we have a huge project that went in that we didn't object to or didn't raise any objections. It's just this particular project that we're really, really alarmed about. So I just wanted to say why. So the first thing, I agree with what other people have brought up, all of it. I just want to try to take it from the standpoint of our school in particular. The first thing is the traffic concerns. So we have 217 students that are at our school every day. We don't have a gym at our school. We wish we did, but we don't. So we use that lowers that's just right down the street from this proposed building. Every day we're crossing the alley. 217 students are crossing the alley to go into this lowers parking lot. For recess, all of our PE is there. So we're literally going right across this alley where
Can you
this
show
building
that?
is going into.
Can you show that on that plan?
Yeah, I'll help her.
Gotta show these guys.
So, this is where they entrance, and they walk down the alley this way, and they enter this lower here. So they're walking down, this is the path they'd be using, right there.
Right, so this is where there's no turnaround. This is actually another recess area that we use up here that's being shown as parking right there, but it's not a turnaround for the alley. So you can say where those cars would be going, or emergency vehicles, deliveries, garbage pickup, anything related to that. That's right where our students walk, is right along there.
Can you point out the proposed site for this development?
This is the proposed site of the development right here.
And you can see this is our climber toy right here, like right on the alley. Playground? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, with little 3 to 14-year-olds. So we're concerned about that. The second thing is the privacy. With having these 217 3 through 14-year-olds, we feel really concerned about their privacy. You know, this is going to be a tall building, looking right out over our playground, right over our school. So it's a huge concern from us. You know, we have another little unit that's going in right here that's, I think, 4 units. That's fine. You know, we don't have a problem with that. That's fine. They all have their own parking spots. You know, we realize, you know, that's where we live and what we live in. But this is a completely different project. So we're very concerned about our student safety. You know, it's anticipated to be kind of John was saying, it's like a dorm basically. So we're going to have people moving in, moving out. You know, it's not going to be a family buying this townhome. It's going to be people just coming in and out, which honestly as a principal does not make me feel safe. It doesn't make me feel like our students are safe. And I know a lot of our parents have written letters of concern about this, but it really is extremely troubling to me. The other concern that I just wanted to bring up that's different, and I agree with what everyone else is saying, but it's just the noise too. You know, if you have 4 families living there, that's one thing. You know, that kind of generates a normal amount of noise. But we have a very strongly academic school where great learning is happening every day. So we have 40 to 80 people living there, right on our, you know, right adjacent to us. We're really concerned about that as well. So I just wanted to close by saying we think it's actually a hazard to our students' safety, and it should not move forward in its current form. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy Roberts.
Hi, I live at 3904 Southwest Arroyo Drive. We've been in Seattle only 4 years, so. But I've got one question and one request. The one question is, you know, this is not a project that is independent of everything else that's going on here. It was all part of that plan. And I'm curious as to what the intention was for the businesses in the local area, because when you develop mostly micro apartments and apartment type apartments where it is, you know, on the size of a dorm room and stuff, people they don't make large purchases and then ride the bus. They will order from the internet, they will take their car and drive to a mall, but they are not going to make large purchases and walk and carry them or take the bus. Given that, what type of businesses are desired in the Junction? Because there's only so many restaurants and bars you can support, and there are a lot of other shops around here that people patronize. All that traffic then is going to be on the road going somewhere else, or we're going to add to the traffic with delivery trucks, FedEx, UPS, you name it, because people are going to order off the internet. And the businesses here are having enough trouble competing with the internet. That is not going to be helpful to them. So that's an observation that I would like you to consider as you look at all of the projects that are going in here and their smaller sizes. And the other thing is, the urban village concept has been implemented in, as you said, in Ballard and Fremont and other places. So based on Seattle's experience with these other urban villages, have you found that the number of new cars that came into an area where the smaller apartments were was commensurate with your assumptions? That most people that moved into those did not bring cars, so that it was minimal impact on parking, and that and if not, what was the difference? Is it 1 or 2 cars above the number of parking spots, or is the median number of new cars significantly above what the original assumption was? Because we should be able to get data to support the assumptions that are going into these kind of decisions based on implementation in other areas in the city. And also, in those areas, did the ridership on the buses for commuters and other mobility trips, if you would, did that increase commensurate with the number of people that moved into these smaller apartments? If it didn't, then we need to rethink the entire scope of things in this area, but especially this one. Because these are all going to be, as they pointed out, micro apartments. Thank you.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll just say a couple of things. I mean, one thing I do want to say is that these are very small apartments, but they're not micro apartments, so that's just something to keep in mind. One thing we do.
Can I ask you just what your definition of a micro apartment is, and just for my edification, if nothing else?
What's the square footage?
Yeah.
Well, so micro apartments have some shared features. They typically have a shared kitchen.
I thought that was the apartment.
Well, apartment is
It's a trademark.
It's a trademark
Yeah.
name. We don't like to use that. In the city, we call them micro apartments. But so if it's a micro apartments, often have a shared kitchen or other shared features in the building. These are all independent apartments in this project.
What's the square footage?
Square feet per unit?
Well,
300.
250 square feet.
Yeah.
271.
Or at least that was my calculation.
you guys have looked at this closer than I have, so yeah.
So you had a number of questions about parking ratios and
Well,
ridership.
just looking for
Yeah.
data that
Yeah.
supports the assumptions.
Yeah, no, I think those are excellent questions. What I would suggest is you contact me tomorrow, and I'm going to put you in touch with a colleague who looks at that stuff every day.
Okay.
Yeah, and I just wanted, there's a couple other things I could respond and answer your questions. And there was a parking study of the Junction in 2009 that inventoried on-street parking and how often it was used, et cetera. You can find that on SDOT's website. We'd be happy to give you that information. After that study, there were some changes to the time-limited parking of on-street spaces. So there could be additional on-street parking management strategies. And I wanted to touch on your comment about the local businesses, because one thing that we see is that in places where we have a lot of folks living in apartments or townhouses where there's density, that really helps to support local businesses. You guys have a lot of nice restaurants, but you also have a lot of nice boutiques and shops here on California. So, I mean, I understand your comment about folks shopping on the internet, but typically we see the folks who move into smaller apartments as folks who like to walk and support their local businesses. So there could be some benefit there too.
But with the parking management, would that mean you would limit more time, there would be less time to go shopping? If that's what you're indicating, that there might be some parking management from the results from the 2009 study. And if that's true, then that would mean you would limit the time that you could park someplace even more than it is now, which means there'd be less time for shopping. So how does that help the businesses?
Well, yeah, I think, why don't we talk, we can talk offline if you want, but when I say time-limited parking, I'm referring to like a 2-hour restriction, as opposed to being able to park there for an unlimited amount of time. So that actually helps the turnover of the parking, so, folks who are coming to visit a business might be able to get a space.
So right now, if you don't have to pay, and you're saying that you bring in a time-limited parking for the Junction area?
Well, I'm not a parking expert. We can direct you to parking experts. But yes, those types of strategies could be looked at.
Vlad?
Before I start, the first thing I want to say is, and Jeff gave a highly abbreviated version of the process through which things filter down to buildings. And really, we're governed by the Growth Management Act in Washington State, so the comprehensive plan is part of regulating that. But the important thing is that the City of Seattle chose the neighborhood planning process for urban villages to determine the urban design, the things that lead to projects like this. And there was a process here when I moved to West Seattle just over 17 years ago. It was the end of the neighborhood planning process. And if you go through that neighborhood plan, there is nowhere that there is a building like this, not even in higher density areas. So in essence, the city has reneged on a multi-year process that the city went through with the neighborhood, and the neighborhood acquiesced to all this extra density. So this is kind of piling on from what the community determined. And it really defies logic to think that in low-rise development, which is a transitional zone with single family, that you would have this across the street from a single family home. It just defies logic. And I actually want to get into some of the specifics because I've been going through the code just to try to figure out how this happened. And in addition to the 2010 changes, the other significant thing that occurred was there was a no parking requirement code revision, which was was it 2 years ago? So that was another significant thing that contributed to this. In looking at, this is zoned low-rise 2, and it actually, from the interpretation of DPD, it's not subject to design review, not the public design review, or even administrative design review. Is that correct?
Right.
And so let me just ask, if this was a higher density, if this was LR3, what would be the requirement for this property if they presented this?
It'd be design.
It would be design review because it's 8 units that determines in a higher density. So there's a gap in the density in the code. The code is deficient. And it would also require design review if there are 3 townhouses here. So if they did just 3 townhouses, they would require design review, administrative design review, right? Bruce, and I appreciate the position that you guys are in often with this. So I guess the question, and this is another question, assuming there's no design review required, either administrative design review or full design review, in LR2 zones, and there are LR2 zones all through the city. It's a very common zoning, and it's transitional zoning. And you have a 40-unit building here. If a developer consolidated, say, a whole block, they bought a whole block and it was LR2 zoning, could they have a 400-unit project that was not subject to any design review?
I think that's rhetorical.
It's not rhetorical,
Well,
it's a practical
There's a
question.
site down at the end of the street that's a parking lot currently owned by the West Seattle Christian Church. If this design were projected onto it, it could hold 146 units.
So the question, it's really, the question is, where is the threshold? Where does the city say, we're engaged in regulating this? Because the city has a regulatory process, and that regulatory process has to click in at some point. It's part of the Growth Management Act. It's actually written in there at a higher state code level. So if the city code level is deficient down here, where it's spitting out these kind of funny projects, because they are really coming out of the blue here, where does SEPA kick in? Where does other kind of higher code issues kick in and say, hey, 40 unit, if this is 6 units, okay. But 40 units is a lot, and there's another project that's 30 units and no parking in Morgan Junction. That's very, it's a similar situation. So I just want, for the record, to make sure that everybody understands that the city right now has a process where the code allows, as in the stepping stone of the higher density, like downtown, it's supposed to triangulate out and then go into single family. It goes down, it's pretty transitional, goes to LR3, and then there's weird things happens with LR2 is completely out of the picture, and then it goes down, and there's single family. So it's not a consistent process. And I want to say first, also just to finish up here, that I'm an architect, I like to build, but this is really kind of outrageous. It's really a scandal that DPD would allow something like this in a community, and in a community that's actually worked for many years in order to accommodate density within the neighborhood. So that's all I have to say.
I will say that the city recognizes, or my department recognizes what you've described. The one mechanism we have right now, before we do implement design review at L2, if we do, is SEPA, which has one of the SEPA criteria is height, bulk, and scale. In the correction notices, we did identify that as a potential issue. So that is one way if it doesn't meet design review threshold and it meets SEPA, we have height, bulk, and scale to work on. That may not be complete enough.
And Bruce, that because you manage the design review process here for the city, and I appreciate the good job that you did on that. Design review was implemented to prevent this kind of meeting where people were outraged because this was happening in the early 90s. The city recognized there's a lot of litigation, there's a lot of horrible things happening, there's conflict with the city, so they implemented this program. And here's a prime example of a project that kind of has gone back to the ancient times here. In medieval times when people were walking around with axes.
Thank you. Dave Mullis.
My son owns a home at 4440 41st, and he would be here tonight except he's driving the bus. So I told him I'd stop by and see what was going on. The same type of thing is going on in Morgan Junction where I live. And it's gotten so bad that it's difficult to drive or ride a bicycle on the streets because there's cars on both sides. You can't, you wait at one end of the block or the other for these other cars to move by. It's completely out of hand. The scale and the scope of these buildings is ridiculous. And I would like to speak of my experience for 25 years with this kind of issue. Before I moved back to West Seattle, I lived in Fremont, and a developer tore down 5 houses and put up 48 units in my neighborhood. Destroyed the neighborhood. The artists and the musicians left, and I got, I don't know, 48 at least, 60, maybe 100 people lived in that building, and I never met them. They'd drive down the street, they'd press the button and drive inside. They might come out on the patio and look around, but they weren't neighbors. And the Department of Planning and Development is ruining our neighborhoods, just destroying it. It's a runaway train.
And I would like to encourage everybody here to look up something called the Coalition for an Affordable, Livable Seattle 2015.org. Because what I'm seeing here is the same thing I've seen for 25 years. These planners come in, they organize these meetings with one building at a time, and then they write down everybody's complaints so that they can go back and mitigate the complaints. And by mitigate, I mean, they'll go back and rewrite the rules. And if you look at the comprehensive plan, not only in 2010, but in 2013, they just did a massive rewrite of the comprehensive plan. And I really truly believe that the comprehensive plan, 1994, was going to end in July of this year. But now they're pushing it out to 2035. And if you want an affordable, livable, family-oriented West Seattle, we've got to stop this runaway train now. And we can do that by bringing in a new city council when that vote comes to it. We can get neighborhood representation on that council. We can change the Commission of Planning, and we can certainly change the Department of Planning and Development. And I hope there's enough interest in people here to do that very thing. That's the Coalition for an Affordable, Livable Seattle, 2015.org.
Monica Lundberg.
Hi, I'm Monica Lundberg. I live down in the Morgan Junction area. Like many of the other speakers here, I'm in favor of more leadership from DPD. We're really not being heard at all. There's numerous projects across the city with a similar situation with the urban village overlay, lack of parking. And so I'm just really